The Trump administration was set to ban TikTok, the wildly popular Chinese-owned mobile phone application, until Friday, when the short-form video service was granted a 2-week reprieve by the U.S. government to find an American buyer. That means TikTok will keep running on 100 million American devices, and that's been the administration's worry, claiming that TikTok, quote, automatically captures vast swaths of information from its users, potentially allowing China to track the locations of federal employees, conduct corporate espionage, or even blackmail. President-elect Biden has called the Chinese-owned app a matter of genuine concern. TikTok says that's all unfounded, that it's a platform for creativity and free expression. So we wanted to know if TikTok is merely a pawn in the great power rivalry between the U.S. and China, or a genuine threat. This is TikTok. It bills itself as the last sunny corner on the internet. 50 million Americans spend nearly an hour each day scrolling through a never-ending parade of short videos made by other users. They may be lip-syncing popular songs or performing them themselves. TikTok is a stage for preening and dancing. But like Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook, TikTok's real business is keeping you engaged as long as possible in order to collect your data.
They're not providing a platform for music videos out of the goodness of their heart, right? They're making money by providing really deep insights into their user base.
Klon Kitchen spent 15 years working for the U.S. intelligence community, including the CIA, and now is Director of Technology Policy at the Conservative Heritage Foundation.
What makes TikTok particularly concerning is its relationship with the Chinese Communist Party in Beijing, the government of China. The Chinese have fused their government and their industry together so that they cooperate to achieve the ends of the state.
And TikTok is a factor in that?
Yeah, so
but when you look at it, it just seems
dance videos.
Fun and innocuous.
Imagine you woke up tomorrow morning and you saw a news report that China had distributed 100 million sensors around the United States, and that any time an American walked past one of these sensors, this sensor automatically collected off of your phone your name, your home address, your personal network, who you're friends with, your online viewing habits, and a whole host of other pieces of information. Well, that's precisely what TikTok is. It has 100 million US users. It collects all of that information.
And more. Like many US social media companies, TikTok asks users for access to their cameras, microphones, photos, videos, and contacts. More obscure data, like keystroke patterns, are collected from everyone using the app. Keystrokes, what does that tell them?
The patterns and the rhythms of the way that you strike the keyboard, it can basically say, this device belongs to this user. And you can do a lot with that if you are a foreign government. It's very, very invasive.
Kara Frederick knows the power of big tech. She helped set up Facebook's counterterrorism program after spending 6 years at the Pentagon, the national security agency, and as a targeter for special operations in Afghanistan.
Gen Z lives on this. Gen Z is going to grow up someday. Do we want all of that information sort of hanging out there for nation-state adversaries to scoop up, to integrate with other data sets?
But is it different from what other apps collect?
So a lot of applications do collect these, fulsome, comprehensive digital profiles. They collect your digital behavior. However, TikTok is owned by a Beijing-based company called ByteDance.
ByteDance is a $140 billion Chinese company founded by this man, 37-year-old Zhang Yiming. Known as an AI or artificial intelligence savant, Zhang created the cutting-edge, AI-driven algorithm that fuels all of ByteDance's platforms, like Douyin, the Chinese version of TikTok, with 600 million daily users. Both apps use the same logo and similar algorithms, which analyze exactly how long users watch a video. Experiment with new offerings, fine-tuning until it seems to be reading users' minds.
TikTok is the first foreign-based application, social media application, that has taken off in the United States. Nobody else has been able to do that. Why? Because their artificial intelligence, their algorithm, is so good.
At 40, Republican Josh Hawley is the youngest member of the U.S. Senate and a former Attorney General of Missouri. A staunch supporter of President Trump, he's earned bipartisan support for exposing the excesses of big tech. Google, Facebook, and Apple have all been in his sights. Now it's TikTok.
So we'll start off then with, I'll kind of frame it, and then we'll go into the TikTok questions.
We were with him last March as he prepared to chair a subcommittee hearing that he called Dangerous Partners, Big Tech and Beijing. But TikTok and Apple were no-shows.
Executives from TikTok, they will never come and take the oath and testify in public. That, I think, is unusual, and I think it begs the question, what is it they have to hide?
TikTok will tell you that it's a platform for free expression, and they sort of market themselves as the sunniest place on the internet.
Here's the problem with TikTok as it exists now. It is owned by a Chinese parent company that has direct ties to the Chinese Communist Party. And we also know that under Chinese law, TikTok, ByteDance, the parent, is required to share data with the Chinese Communist Party.
Required.
Required to under Chinese law. That's not a matter of speculation. That's in the law. American users, parents, teenagers, they have no way of knowing about any of this.
China is also notorious for using its big tech companies to track and predict the behavior of its own citizens, as seen in this 60 Minutes report from last year. China's stated goal is to become the world leader in artificial intelligence by 2030. Senator Hawley fears China is doing the same thing here. Just last February, the Department of Justice charged 4 Chinese military hackers with stealing records from the credit reporting agency Equifax, affecting 145 million Americans, almost half the country. China has been caught hacking the second largest American health insurer, the agency that stores information about all government employees, even records from the Marriott hotel chain. Hawley says TikTok is just the friendly face of Chinese data harvesting. So what would the Chinese Communist Party do with all this information?
Build dossiers, build files on every American who they can get their hands on. We could ask the same question about the Equifax breach. Why would the Chinese government be interested in the financial history of hundreds of millions of Americans? What are they going to do with that? Well, clearly, they thought it was very, very useful.
Hawley says TikTok shouldn't be allowed to operate in the U.S. unless it separates completely from its Chinese parent, ByteDance. A deal to sell a piece of TikTok to Walmart and the U.S. software giant Oracle is in limbo because China is blocking the export of TikTok's proprietary algorithm. Bloomberg News likened that to selling KFC without the Colonel's secret 11 herbs and spices.
I want to see the actual terms of the deal. The platform, the app platform, has got to be rebuilt because right now it's been built by Chinese engineers. They have control and access to how the platform works, to how the algorithm works. Otherwise, you're just changing the label.
Despite all the suspicion, TikTok's popularity is booming worldwide. It's been downloaded 2.5 billion times in more than 150 countries. Here in the U.S., it's become a go-to platform for creators of all stripes.
Woo! Everybody breathing, some people are sneezing.
Including celebrities, influencers, and more older users.
I think the one thing that connects all of these videos, outside of them all being less than a minute in length, is really this idea of authenticity.
Vanessa Pappas is interim CEO of TikTok. A former YouTube executive, she inherited the top job in August, just in time to face all those thorny questions about China. She spoke to us from TikTok's new office in Los Angeles. What is your understanding of why the president wants to ban TikTok?
So when the executive order was delivered, we very much came out and said that we disagree with the characterization, which was done without due process and was not based on facts.
Your parent company, ByteDance, is a Chinese company.
Yeah, so ByteDance is founded by our Chinese entrepreneur, Yiming Zhang. And at the same time, though, ByteDance is a privately held company.
Do you report directly to him?
Yes, I report to him.
Is it fair to say that ByteDance engineers created the TikTok recommendation algorithm and that they helped to update it and maintain it?
So we have engineers around the world. TikTok actually has people in 48 countries around the world. Certainly, we have engineers in China as well.
Tell me about ByteDance. It's a massive social media company in China, but it's also billed as an artificial intelligence company.
Yes, they use AI to power a number of their products. But again, I don't know how much else I could share about that since my day-to-day is really focused on TikTok.
Papa says her focus is on TikTok's content, not the technology behind it. And like many big tech executives, she downplays the amount and usefulness of data the platform collects.
If you were trying to find information on somebody, TikTok would not be the first place. It wouldn't be the 100th place, and it wouldn't be the 1,000th place.
Your critics, they point out that under China's 2017 cybersecurity law, Chinese-based companies are required to provide the Chinese government with access to their data.
TikTok does not operate in China. The U.S. data is stored here in the U.S. and with backup in Singapore, and we have strict data access controls. If a government were to request data, we will put that in our transparency report and tell you, and certainly the Chinese government has not requested data, and if they did, it would be an emphatic no.
Former CIA officer Klon Kitchen says in China, no big technology company is independent of the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP.
The national security and cybersecurity laws of China require them to operate and build their networks in such a fashion as to where the government has unfettered access to their data. And so, no, the CCP doesn't ask them for information. They don't need to. They have access to the information.
There seems to be a great disconnect. I mean, the American people, at least the kids who are on TikTok, have no concern about what we're talking about here.
That's right.
They just think it's fun.
And for them it is. They want to make a dance video with their friend. I don't begrudge them that. But, you know, their ignorance of the threat does nothing to diminish it.
This past week, the Federal Trade Commission was asked to investigate the data collected by Google on its Android operating system, which powers most of the world's smartphones. It was a tiny blip in the news cycle, but another sign of Washington's and Europe's growing concerns about the enormous, largely unchecked power accumulated by tech giants like Facebook, Amazon, and Google over the last 2 decades. Of the three, Google, which is part of a holding company called Alphabet, is the most powerful, intriguing, and omnipresent in our lives. This is how it came to be. Most people love Google. It's changed our world, insinuated itself in our lives, made itself indispensable. You probably don't even have to type google.com into your computer. It's often the default setting, a competitive advantage Google paid billions of dollars for. No worry, Google is worth more than $750 billion right now, and you don't get that big by accident. Since going public in 2004, Google has acquired more than 200 companies, expanding its reach across the internet. It bought YouTube, the biggest video platform. It bought Android, the operating system that runs 80% of the world's smartphones. And it bought DoubleClick, which distributes much of the world's digital advertising. All of this barely raising an eyebrow with regulators in Washington.
Were any of those acquisitions questioned by the Antitrust Division of the Justice Department?
Some were investigated, but only superficially. The government just really isn't enforcing our antitrust laws, and that's what's happened. None of these acquisitions have been challenged.
Gary Reebok is one of the most prominent antitrust lawyers in the country, widely credited with persuading the Justice Department to sue Microsoft back in the 90s, the last major antitrust case against big tech. Now, he's battling Google.
You think Google's a monopoly?
Oh, yes, of course, Google's a monopoly. In fact, they're a monopoly in several markets. They're a monopoly in search. They're a monopoly in search advertising.
Those technologies are less than 25 years old and may seem small compared to the industrial monopolies like railroads and Standard Oil a century ago. But Reebok says there's nothing small about Google.
Google makes the internet work. The internet would not be accessible to us without a search engine.
And they control it.
They control access to it. That's the important part. Google is the gatekeeper for the World Wide Web, for the internet as we know it. It's every bit as important today as petroleum was when John D. Rockefeller was monopolizing that.
Last year, Google conducted 90% of the world's internet searches. When billions of people asked trillions of questions, it was Google that provided the answers, using computer algorithms known only to Google.
They have this phrase they use, competition is just a click away. They have no competition. Bing, their competition, has 2% of the market. They have 90%.
Jonathan Taplin is a digital media expert and director emeritus of the Annenberg Innovation Lab at the University of Southern California. He says Google's expertise may be technology, but its business is advertising. And its most valuable commodity is highly specialized information about us. It's helped Google control roughly 60% of worldwide advertising revenue on the internet. Taplin says traditional companies can't compete because they don't have the data.
They know who you are, where you are, what you just bought, what you might want to buy. And so if I'm an advertiser and I say, I want 24-year-old women in Nashville, Tennessee, who drive trucks and drink bourbon, I can do that on Google.
People tell their search engines things they wouldn't even tell their wives. I mean, it's a very powerful and yet very intimate technology, and that gives the company that controls it a mind-boggling degree of control over our entire society.
Google is so dominant in search and search advertising that analysts and venture capitalists in Silicon Valley say it's extremely difficult for startups to get funding if their business model requires them to compete with Google for ad revenue. Jeremy Stoppelman co-founded Yelp more than a decade ago, a website that collects local reviews on everything from auto mechanics to restaurants nationwide and makes money selling ads.
The initial promise of Google was to organize the world's information, and ultimately that manifested itself in you expecting that the top links, the things that it shows at the top of that page, are the best from around the web, the best that the world has to offer. And I can tell you that is not the case. That is not the case anymore.
Instead of doing what's best for consumers, Stoppelman says Google is doing what's best for Google.
If I were starting out today, I would have no shot of building Yelp. That opportunity has been closed off by Google and their approach.
In what way?
Because if you provide great content in one of these categories that is lucrative to Google and seen as potentially threatening, they will snuff you out.
What do you mean snuff you out?
They will make you disappear. They will bury you.
Yelp and countless other sites depend on Google to bring them web traffic, eyeballs for their advertisers. But now Stoppelman says their biggest competitor in the most lucrative markets is Google. He says it's collecting and bundling its own information on things like shopping and travel and putting it at the very top of the search results, regardless of whether it belongs there on merit.
So let's start off with sushi.
He showed us how it worked by Googling sushi San Francisco.
All the prime real estate is here. This is where the consumer, their eye focuses. And that's by design. Google wants you to pay attention to their content.
All of the information here is owned by Google, from the maps to the reviews. Stoppelman says if you click on any of these links at the top of the page, you may think you've gone to another website. But in fact, you will still be on Google, seeing what it wants you to see while it collects your personal information and maybe exposes you to Google advertising.
If you click anything inside this box, you stay on Google and they make more money.
That's right.
Google told us it doesn't have anything to do with money. It's about improving its product by making searches quicker and easier for its customers, by eliminating the need to click through lots of other sites. Stoppelman says it's about stifling competition, pushing it down the page where it's less likely to be seen. The advantage, he says, is even more striking if you look at the search results on a smartphone.
This is exactly what your phone would look like in the palm of your hand. This is all of Google's own property right here. It takes up the entire screen.
How important is that first page?
It's not even just the first page. It's the first few links on the page is the vast majority of where user attention goes and where the traffic flows.
So if you're not at the top of the page or the bottom of the first page or on the second page, that's going to affect your business.
Yeah, if you're on the second page, forget it. You're not a real business.
Yelp, Microsoft, Amazon, eBay, Expedia, and Yahoo all complained about Google's dominance in what they called its anti-competitive behavior to the Federal Trade Commission, which in 2011 conducted an investigation.
According to this confidential memo, parts of which were inadvertently given to the Wall Street Journal years later, the FTC's Bureau of Competition had recommended that an antitrust lawsuit be filed against Google for some of its business practices. It said Google is in the unique position of being able to make or break any web-based business and has strengthened its monopolies over search and search advertising through anti-competitive means and forestalled competitors and would-be competitors' ability to challenge those monopolies. It specifically cited Google for stealing competitors' content and imposing restrictions on advertisers and other websites that limited their ability to utilize other search engines. But the recommendations were rejected.
It flatly says that Google's conduct was anti-competitive. It flatly says that Google's conduct hurt consumers. I mean, what else would you need to know to vote out a complaint? There it is, written by your own staff, and yet nothing happened.
They closed the case.
They closed the case. Correct.
The FTC's commissioners decided that Google's conduct could be addressed with voluntary improvements to some of its business practices, and that Google's decision to move its own products to the top of the search page could possibly be of benefit to consumers. But Reebok and others who were directly involved in the investigation have long suspected that the outcome had something to do with Google's political muscle in Washington and its close relationship with the Obama administration. Google spent more money on lobbying last year than any other corporation, employing 25 different firms and helping fund 300 trade associations, think tanks, and other groups, many of which influence policy.
They have a seat at the table in every discussion that implicates this issue at all. They know about developments that we never even hear about. So their influence, from my perspective, is very, very difficult to challenge.
Right now, the only one taking aggressive action against Google and the power of big tech is Margaret Vestager, the competition commissioner for the European Union. During her 4 years in office, Vestager has become a thorn in the side of Silicon Valley, fining Facebook $122 million for a merger violation and ordering Ireland to recover $15 billion in taxes owed by Apple. Last summer, she levied a record $2.7 billion fine against Google for depriving certain competitors of a chance to compete with them.
Just as well as I admire some of the innovation by Google over the last decade, well, I want their illegal behavior to stop.
And that's what you feel has gone on?
Not only do we feel it, we mean that we can prove it.
In researching the case, Vestager says her staff went through 1.7 billion Google search queries and found that Google was manipulating its secret search formulas or algorithms to promote its own products and services and sending its competitors into oblivion.
It's very difficult to find the rivals because on average you'd find them only on page 4 in your search results.
And why so far down?
Well, because then you don't find them. I don't know anyone who goes to page 4 on their search result. Jokingly, you could say that this is where you should keep your secrets because no one ever comes there.
Do you think this has been deliberate on Google's part?
Yes, we think that this is done on purpose.
How do they do it? I mean, I think everybody has this idea that Google has this algorithm and they put the best searches right at the top.
Well, it is exactly the algorithm that does it, both the promotion of Google themselves and the demotion of others.
So they're rigging the game.
Yes, and it is illegal.
Google has paid its $2.7 billion fine and is aggressively appealing the decision. But for now, Stoppelman says everyone is still playing by Google's rules.
If you're in business, you have to be on Google.
Yeah, Google wields enormous power across the industry, and they set the rules. The question is, who's watching Google?
Google declined our request for an interview with one of its executives for this story, but in a written response to our questions, the company denied it was a monopoly in search or search advertising, citing many competitors, including Amazon and Facebook. It says it does not make changes to its algorithm to disadvantage competitors, and that, quote, our responsibility is to deliver the best results possible to our users, not specific placements for sites within our results. We understand that those sites whose ranking falls will be unhappy and may complain publicly. This has not been a great year for big tech on Wall Street or in Washington. For decades, companies like Google, Facebook, and Amazon have made vast sums monetizing the personal information of their users with almost no oversight or regulation. They're still making vast sums of money, but public attitudes about their size and power and their ability or willingness to police themselves are being called into question. A consensus is developing that something has to change, and once again, the impetus is coming from Europe, which is becoming the world's leader in internet privacy and data protection. With a 31-year-old lawyer as the catalyst, the European Parliament has enacted a tough new law that has Silicon Valley scrambling to comply and pressuring lawmakers here to do something about protecting your data. 7 times this year, big tech has been called on the carpet to answer for data breaches, fake news, political meddling on the internet, and the endless amounts of personal information being gathered on Americans.
I don't want to vote to have to regulate Facebook, but by God, I will.
The era of the Wild West in social media is coming to an end.
The question is no longer whether we need a federal law to protect consumers' privacy. The question is what shape will that law take?
In Europe, they already have a law in place. After levying multi-billion-dollar fines against Google for anti-competitive behavior, the European Union enacted the world's most ambitious internet privacy law.
Good morning.
Even winning support from the CEO of the biggest tech company in America, Apple's Tim Cook.
This is surveillance. And these stockpiles of personal data serve only to enrich the companies that collect them.
Speaking in Brussels, Cook did not say which companies he was talking about, but Apple wasn't one of them. Its business model is making and selling phones and computers, not marketing personal information for advertising like Google and Facebook.
Our own information, from the everyday to the deeply personal, is being weaponized against us with military efficiency. It is time for the rest of the world, including my home country, to follow your lead.
Most people would agree that the point man in Europe has been a spiky-haired, 31-year-old Viennese lawyer named Max Schrems, who's been inflicting misery in Silicon Valley for the past 7 years. He not only brought international attention to the issue of data privacy, he brought big tech lawyers into court. In the information age, he says, data is the most important commodity. The question is, who does it belong to?
Who owns your data?
The legislation here says it's you that your data belongs to.
You should have control over it.
You should have control over that. However, in an environment where there is no such law, basically whoever factually has the power over it, which is usually the big tech company, owns it in that sense.
Max Schrems was a major force in drafting the General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR. It became law in May after a long battle with big tech, and every company that does business in Europe, including the most powerful ones in America, must comply. It was designed specifically to ensure that consumers, not tech companies, have control over the collection and use of their own personal information.
What kind of new rights does this law give European citizens that people in the United States might not have?
The default under the European system is you're not allowed to use someone else's data unless you have a justification. And the result of that is that you have rights like a right that you walk up to a company and say, delete everything you have about me. You have a right to access, so you can say, I want to have a copy of everything you have about me. And all of these little elements in the law overall are meant to give you that power over your data that in an information society we should probably have.
And right now in the United States, you have none of those legal rights.
Americans have no control today about the information that's collected about them every second of their lives.
Jeff Chester is the executive director of the Center for Digital Democracy. He's been a major voice on digital privacy for 2 decades and says the only Americans guaranteed privacy on the internet are children under 13. He says there are some limitations on some specific medical and financial information, but the internet has rendered them obsolete.
There are no rules. There's not a government agency really protecting them. The companies can do whatever they want in terms of gathering our information and using it in any way they see fit.
How did the big tech companies come to collect all this information?
No one ever told them they couldn't collect it all. There'd been no limits at all ever established.
And that's what's going on with GDPR. Somebody's saying you can't.
That's exactly right. GDPR says you can't collect it without permission.
The big tech companies have always argued that consumers have given them permission to take their personal data in exchange for using the product. It's buried in the fine print on those long, impenetrable online privacy agreements that you have to click on. Max Schrems says it's not free choice, but constitutes coercion under the new European law. On the day it was enacted, Schrems' nonprofit group, None of Your Business, took action against Facebook and Google for allegedly violating European privacy laws.
It's this take it or leave it approach. You know it whenever you open an app, it says, agree or don't use the app. And your choice is basically not existent because either you go offline or you have to agree.
Schrems cited the example of Google's Android operating system, the software which runs up to 80% of the world's smartphones. But to use one, you must first activate it and give Google consent to collect your personal data on all of its products.
You paid $1,000 right now, and you're not allowed to use your $1,000 phone unless you agree that all the data goes to someone else. And that is basically forced consent.
The tech companies say, look, you, the user, you gave us permission to take this information, to use it the way we wanted to. You agreed to it. And you signed on. You made the deal.
The individual doesn't have the power, the time, the legal expertise to understand any of that. And then you're sitting at home at your desk and have the option to only say yes. This is not what any reasonable person would consider a fair deal.
Schrems has been waging this battle since 2011, when he spent a semester in California at Santa Clara University School of Law. A lawyer from Facebook told his class that big tech didn't pay any attention to European privacy laws because they were rarely enforced and that the fines were very small.
It was obviously the case that ignoring European privacy laws was the much cheaper option. The maximum penalty, for example, in Austria was 20,000 euros. So just a lawyer telling you how to comply with the law was more expensive than breaking it.
At the time, most people had no idea how much personal information was being collected on them. So when the 23-year-old Schrems returned to Austria, he decided to ask Facebook if he could see what they'd collected on him.
If you go into a couple of details, for example...
By mistake or miracle, someone at Facebook sent him this stack of information, lifting the veil on the extent of the company's interest in him.
And after a while, I got a PDF file with 1,200 pages after using Facebook for 3 years, and I'm not a heavy user or anything like that.
Facebook had created a dossier of Max's life that included his location history, events he attended, all of his contact information, and his private Facebook messages, even the ones he thought he had deleted.
So these were personal conversations you had that you thought were between yourself and the other person?
Yeah.
And they're all here?
They're all here, and they're basically undeletable. And
it created a huge stir at the time, but it's nothing compared to what's being gathered now. Today, Facebook collects information on people who don't even have an account. Google's Android software knows whether the user is walking, running, or riding in a car. And Amazon has patented algorithms that could be used on its Echo smart speaker to listen in on continuous conversations and even read the mood of people in the room.
the reality is that this industry is so fast moving right now. Even if you have perfect enforcement mechanisms, usually they will get away with it unless there is a serious penalty.
Today, if one of the big tech companies chooses to ignore Europe's new data protection law, it could cost them 4% of their global revenues, which for the biggest companies would mean billions of dollars. Those decisions will likely be made here in Dublin, the busiest of Europe's 28 data protection centers and the place where most American tech companies have their European headquarters. They flocked here years ago because of Ireland's low corporate taxes and its reputation for relaxed regulation. Ireland's Data Protection Commissioner Helen Dixon says it's not going to be business as usual.
US internet companies have no doubt that this law is serious, it has serious bite, and all of them are eager to avoid any engagement with that.
How would you describe your relationship with these companies right now? Is the relationship cooperative or contentious?
It's all of those things in any 1 week. Nice to meet you.
Dixon says tech companies are spending tens of millions of dollars hiring lawyers, compliance officers, and engineers to make sure they're operating within the law. The data protection authorities have only a few thousand employees in Europe to police some of the most powerful companies in the world, but they have subpoena power, can conduct raids, and even shut down operations.
Do you think the big tech companies, the people in Silicon Valley, are taking this seriously?
I think they have to.
Owen Odell is a law professor at Trinity College in Dublin and a leading expert on European privacy law. He says Europe has now established an international standard for internet privacy, and companies like Facebook, Google, and Amazon are not about to retreat from a $17 trillion market.
We have safety standards in cars, but that hasn't stopped us driving cars. We have emission standards for the gas in the cars, but that hasn't stopped us using the gas in the cars. The data companies are going to comply in the same way as the car companies have complied.
To stay in business?
To stay in business.
Since the European privacy law was passed, at least 10 other countries have adopted similar rules. So has the state of California. Perhaps sensing the inevitable, Facebook, Twitter, Google, and Amazon are now saying they could support a U.S. privacy law if they were given considerable input. The Internet Association, which lobbies for big tech, and its president, Michael Beckerman, say they would support giving Americans reasonable access to their information and some privacy rights now enjoyed by the Europeans.
From your point of view, who owns the data that's collected?
I think individuals should have complete control over their information. You should have access to it, both how you're giving it in the online world and offline world, and full transparency on who has the information and what you're getting for it.
But who owns it?
People should have control over it. I don't view it as an ownership, the way you're asking it, but I think the individual...
Europeans do. The European says it's a right. You own your information. You have a right to go to the companies and say, I want this information.
Under the law that we're pushing and the rules that we're pushing and what our companies already do, people can download the information, their personal information that they've shared with the sites, and delete it if they want and cancel their accounts.
Privacy advocate Jeff Chester says the industry wants people to believe that it's cooperating and open to change, but that it won't do anything until it's forced to by law.
This is simply a bait and switch in terms of protecting privacy in America today. The companies have no intention of supporting a privacy law that actually would stop them from collecting our information and give Americans the same rights the Europeans now have.